If you were to ask a non-philosopher to name like a contemporary living philosopher, I mean, I imagine most people probably wouldn't be able to, but if they could, odds are they would name this guy, Peter Singer. He is ridiculously famous, even among non-philosophers, just because of like how important, how influential a lot of his works have become, including the stuff that we're going to be talking about in this module on charitable giving, but also on animal welfare and animal rights. In fact, it's Singer's fault that if you host a philosophy conference and you don't have like vegetarian and vegan options for lunch, you're going to have some pretty grumpy philosophers. He has been tremendously influential in the field of applied ethics. So we're going to be looking at a very, very famous argument from him that giving to charity is obligatory. Let's talk about it. So Singer's going to be making two claims here. First is already a pretty radical claim that charitable giving is obligatory, not supererogatory. We tend to think of charitable giving as something that is, great if you do it, but it's fine if you don't do it. That would be a supererogatory act, above and beyond what is required of you. What Singer's saying here is that it is obligatory. Failing to give is immoral, at least assuming you're able to give. And the second point here is that our moral obligations are only discharged at what he calls the point of marginal utility. Now, if you were to Google marginal utility, you're going to get a principle in economics. That is not what we're talking about. It's not like completely unrelated, but like it is not the same thing. So stay off the internet when you're looking up these philosophy terms. So Singer is a consequentialist, and we kind of talked about this during the consequentialism module, that, it kind of looks like supererogatory acts disappear. Singer's going to take this on and say, yeah, they kind of do, at least charitable giving ones. They are not going to be supererogatory. And to get to this conclusion, he is going to give us a very famous argument by analogy. So, the idea you're walking by a shallow pond and there's a small child drowning in the shallow pond. Now, it's shallow because that way you can just wade into the water and save the kid, right? You don't have to swim or anything. You just walk in, pick the kid up. Now, doing so would probably ruin your clothes, but the loss of your clothes is pretty insignificant compared to the loss of this kid's life. And most people, I think, have the intuition that, yeah, obviously, right? So, and not only is it okay to save this kid, you are morally obligated to do so, right? If you are the one in this position, if you are the one walking by, you see this kid, if you don't go in and save that kid, you're a moral monster. So that's the intuition that Singer wants to push on. That's the intuition a lot of people have. And so this is where we're going to get this guiding principle. This is a really, really important principle. So let's spend some time unpacking this. So if it's in your power to prevent something bad from happening, without sacrificing anything of comparable moral significance, then you ought morally to do it. So, if you can stop something bad from happening without causing something just as bad, then you ought to stop it. So, this is a pretty intuitive principle. It seems to fall out of this shallow pond analogy, right? This shallow pond analogy is just kind of like a case, a use case for this general principle, right? It is in your power to stop this kid from drowning. You are sacrificing something. You're sacrificing your clothing, but that is not comparable in terms of moral significance. And it naturally follows that you ought to save the kid. And so we've got this really broad principle about preventing harm. You might be able to see where this is going with respect to famine relief. But so far, all the conditions are met for the shallow pond analogy, right? You can save the kid, clothes are ruined, but it's not comparable. and you have an obligation to save the kid. Now, this is meant to apply to cases of famine relief. And you can kind of see how that might go, right? There's something I could do, i.e. donate money. It would prevent something bad from happening, i.e. somebody starving to death. And it wouldn't really sacrifice anything comparable, right? $20 is not really comparable to somebody's life. And so I ought morally to give. So let's look at some possible worries here. I mean, one is that like that kid that's drowning is like right dead in front of you, right? Like, whereas a lot of these, you know, things that are happening are often remote parts of the world. Distance, though, doesn't seem to be a morally relevant fact, especially nowadays, right? Like the fact that we're even aware of this stuff. We have a globally connected community. This is nothing, right? Distance just doesn't seem to be a feature. At best, it maybe has some psychological importance. It maybe plays some sort of role in explaining why you're maybe more likely to save a kid drowning than you are to donate money to charity. But that psychological fact doesn't really inform any like moral facts beyond that. At least that's how this response might go. Now, what about the objection that you don't know what a charity does with your money, right? You donate money to some charity and then it goes off into some black box, and right, like you can see when you save the kid, you're like, oh, I did that thing and now the kid's safe and now everybody's happy. You don't really get to see that with your money. Not so fast. There are, I mean, and I've got some here. These are sites that you can go to that will rate various charities in terms of how transparent they are, in terms of like how much of their like income goes towards helping, you know, how much of every dollar that is donated goes towards helping the cause versus, you know, just administrative expenses. The general rule of thumb here is to only try to find charities or only try to give to charities that spend less than 30% of their income on administrative expenses. You don't want a charity where, you know, the top, you know, board people or whatever are getting like millions and millions of dollars. Like, that's not cool. So these three sites, charitynavigator.org, givewell.org, and then Singer's site, thelifeyoucansave.org. These are all nice places you can go that will rate various charities, recommend various charities, you know, depending on what kind of cause you might be interested in. So we are in the information age. You can tell what's going on with your money. So this isn't going to be a really serious objection. Now, this one though, right? If you're a broke college student and you don't have extra money to donate, then that's fine. You don't have to donate. It sort of kind of follows that, like, if you ought to do something, it implies that you can do it. If you genuinely don't have like any spare money to give, then we're not talking about you. Now, hopefully, you know, you'll graduate and get a nice paying job, and then you will be in this position. And this is something you're going to have to think about. Like, is this obligation going to kick in once you've got enough money to start, you know, having a little bit extra to give? And notice though that like this is still a very radical, very extreme kind of conclusion here, that like, okay, you don't have this obligation right now because you're broke, but once you're not, you will. So this is his argument, that suffering and death as a result of famine are bad. You can prevent that bad thing by donating to famine relief, and so you morally ought to donate to famine relief. How much should you donate, though? This is where an even more radical conclusion comes from. So this is the idea of marginal utility. Again, do not Google this term. It's a principle in economics. It's not what we're talking about here. Marginal utility is the point at which, by giving more, by sacrificing more, you start to put yourself at risk of becoming like the people that you were trying to help. So this is a pretty like kind of clear threshold here. what this means is that I'm not going to, because once I like give to the point where my own welfare is like genuinely affected, then I am sacrificing something of comparable moral significance. And that would not and should not be required of me. And we can look back to, like Julia Driver's responses to the demandingness of consequentialism and see that kind of in play there. But, the basic idea, I mean, Singer's a preference utilitarian, and these are my preferences to, have some kind of stable life. So, again, by giving more, I am starting to put myself at risk of becoming impoverished. What does that look like on the ground? Like, I'm still able to buy, like, the necessities that I need. I can still pay my car note if I need a car, my mortgage for my house. I'm still able to save for retirement, have a nest egg. These are all things I'm able to do. I'm not giving like every cent that is not spent on bread and water to charity. What I'm not going to do is like go out to dinner a whole bunch, right? Like, I'm not going to buy the new iPhone or new Android as soon as it comes out. I'm not going to buy like needless cosmetic items unless they're like really, really important for my well-being. So these are the kinds of things that we need to think about, right? Like, living a kind of more minimalist lifestyle than a lot of us do. So instead of going out for fast food, maybe I'll cook in and use that extra $10 or whatever that I saved. I don't know, groceries are kind of expensive, but maybe I save $10 and that money can go to charity. So that's the basic idea. That's what Singer's asking of us. And again, it's a really, really radical conclusion, but it's like, okay, I can prevent something bad from happening and I'm not doing it. Why not? Well, maybe this is why not. If everybody gave $5, we'd be golden. So why should I do more than what I'm, obligated to do than just my fair share, right? I'm going to donate my $5. It's not my fault that these other people aren't donating their $5. Singer kind of addresses this point in this paper, and he's like, while this is true, this is completely hypothetical, right? People aren't giving anything. So why are we engaging in like hypothetical scenarios? This is applied ethics. And so you might wonder like, okay, well, fair enough, but like these are other people's moral failings. Why is that my fault? Why do I have to bear responsibility and give all the way to the point of marginal utility when I could just be giving $5? And what Singer does is push back on this line of thinking with a second version of the shallow pond analogy. So in this scenario, you're walking by a shallow pond, and instead of one kid drowning, there's 10 kids drowning. They really need to put a fence around the shallow pond. But there's 10 kids drowning, and so you're up there, you run up to go save them, and there's you and 9 other people around the pond. So 10 total, grown-ups. 1 child per grown-up, right? So you go in, you save your kid, you pull them out, you set them down, and you look, and like nobody else is doing anything. They're all just kind of standing there. And maybe you're even like, guys, please, just like go save somebody, save a kid or whatever. And they're just, they just don't respond. What are you morally obligated to do in this kind of situation? Is it one and done for you? And Singer says, no, like, it doesn't seem like it. Yes, these other people have failed in their moral obligations, but you still need to save as many kids as you can and then build a fence around the pond. But in the meantime, let's save these kids. And, maybe at some point, right, you're running out into the water and you're pulling these kids back and you get, maybe so tired that you genuinely are at risk of like collapsing and falling into the water and drowning yourself. And that's your point of marginal utility, right? So you might not be obligated to save all of them depending on, how in shape you are and how big the pond is and how muddy it is and all that stuff. But the idea here is that, like, look, just because you're a member of a group with a certain obligation, that doesn't mean that like you just have your own share of that obligation. So it could be the case that one individual may end up inheriting the obligation of the entire group. Now, there are lots of other things that Singer considers. For example, like, why not have governments give? And I think that's a fair point. His response there is more like, well, look, if we're not giving, then governments aren't going to think that we hold this to be very important. So our giving motivates their giving. You know, I think a lot of people, you know, and when I talk with my students and stuff like this, a lot of people are kind of okay with like a certain percentage of our taxes just kind of like, you know, a lot higher than it is now, like going towards some kind of famine relief or some kind of charitable cause. But, you know, different people are going to have different opinions here, and that's totally okay. One thing to kind of think about that I wanted to sort of throw out there, Singer does mention this towards the end of the paper, this more moderate version. Take a look at what's going on here. So if you can prevent something bad from happening without sacrificing anything of moral significance, the only difference between this principle and the earlier one is the word comparable is missing from right here. Anything of comparable moral significance. Now, Singer's pretty clear here that like he does not like endorse this principle. It does not follow from his argument. So there's no real reason to like endorse this over the stronger version. But like think about how extreme this moderate principle still is. Now, what this means is like you can, if for example, if like if the new iPhone or whatever is just like that genuinely morally significant to you, if it like does affect your well-being that much, you can go get it, that kind of thing. But this is still identifying an obligation that we have to donate to charity. And so it's still like a very radical conclusion for Singer. So something worth considering. Which of these principles is more motivated? Which is more reasonable? Can we, maybe argue for the stronger principle? And then when people like flip out, like, well, hey, look, here's this more moderate one that you might like a little bit better. But that's going to do it for Peter Singer. So again, he's arguing that charitable giving is obligatory, not supererogatory. He uses this shallow pond analogy to try to argue for this principle that if it's in your power to prevent something bad from happening without sacrificing anything of comparable moral significance, then you ought morally to do it. And since suffering and death from famine are bad, right, and you can prevent that bad thing from happening by donating to charity, then you ought morally to do it. Next time, we're going to look at a different argument entirely. It's not from a philosopher. It's from a microbiologist turned sort of public figure, I guess. His name is, or was, I guess it still is, but Garrett Hardin. And he's going to be on the complete opposite side of this argument. So we'll take a look, and I'll see you then.